Welcome back to another week and another episode of the Penn State Show here on DK Sports Radio. As always, I'm your host, Audrey Snyder, coming to you from the cozy, maybe spring/winter/ not quite summer confines of Happy Valley, where snow has been on and off. But believe it or not, the blue-white game is indeed this Saturday. Kicks off at 3 p.m. and will air live on the Big Ten Network. And consider this your tune-up for Saturday. This is the all blue-white edition of the Penn State Show. And, you know, I can't believe that we're already at the end of April. Spring ball's been going on for about a month, and as per usual with spring football, you see things, you see flashes. We see glimpses in practice. Coaches see flashes. But really, you don't get a whole heck of a lot of clarity on positions, mainly because there's only so much you can accomplish in 15 workouts, and all the guys who are going to be here, of course, aren't even on campus yet. Penn State will have their freshman class here by the end of June, so you get those guys here, get them about 6 weeks with Dwight Galt, and then they get ready for fall camp, so everything just keeps on ticking right along. But you know, this spring game will continue to have the same format. James Franklin met with the media, Monday night this week instead of Wednesday. They threw us a curveball. Franklin met with the media Monday, and he said he's going to keep the format the same, which is essentially makes for a very lopsided, non-competitive scrimmage. This is really, let's call it what it is. It's a practice. It's practice number 15. Just so happens to be in a much nicer backdrop over in Beaver Stadium. But the blue team will again consist of the starters. This is your ones, and they go against the white team, which is a combination of the 2s and 3s. So don't even bother picking a winner here. We all know how this thing's going to go. But I think it's important to kind of get a look at some of these younger players, guys who we've been hearing a lot about this spring in terms of building depth and, you know, stepping into new roles and those sorts of things. So I'm going to outline a few of those guys here on the show this week, players that I think we should all be keeping an eye on Saturday, whether we're watching in the stadium in temperatures in the mid-50s or you're tuning in from afar. Still, it's football on a Saturday, so that's reason enough to enjoy for me. But, you know, some of the guys that I'm looking forward to seeing, I'll start off here on offense, and I've mentioned him quite a bit this spring, and for good reason, but quarterback Sean Clifford, you know, I think the spring game, we can make a case, it's ultimately about these young guys, but specifically your younger quarterbacks. You know, you usually get an extended look, and Penn State's gotten a much better look at Clifford this spring because of Tommy Stevens being banged up with that undisclosed injury that's kept him out of spring ball. So certainly don't look for Tommy Stevens on the field Saturday. Also, I'd be shocked if we'd see Juwan Johnson out there, among others. But what this means is Clifford's had a bunch of reps as the number 2 guy this spring. And so now it's a chance to kind of go out and see what he looks like in extended time. I mean, who knows how little we'll see Trace McSorley on Saturday. Beyond a few throws here and there, I can't imagine we'll see a whole heck of a lot from him. But this is a good chance for Clifford to get work in the stadium and really get these reps with pretty much the entire receiving core, because Penn State, most likely, of course, assuming Tommy Stevens stays healthy next year and McSorley stays healthy, there again will be no need for Sean Clifford to take on this increased role. But what these reps could do, and something that James Franklin outlined earlier this spring, is that this is all stuff that Clifford can then look at again this spring and this summer in the lead up to fall camp. He can look at it and kind of go back and watch the practices, watch the workouts, see what worked, what didn't work, what he saw in different looks, and the staff can really use this as a big teaching tool. So Clifford, I think, has a chance to have a pretty solid spring game. For what it's worth, we always hear about, darlings of the spring and the game, they do this, they do that. Oftentimes it means nothing, just because we get very deep down on the depth chart. But for Clifford, I definitely think that certainly bears monitoring. A couple other guys I want to see ahead of Clifford, of course, there's younger offensive linemen, guys like C.J. Thorpe and Des Holmes. Now, we've heard a lot about this mean streak, this nastiness that both of these guys possess, and Thorpe has been more so ahead in the run game. Des Holmes has been a little bit ahead compared to Thorpe, at least when it comes to pass protection. So I'm curious to see what these guys look like when they're out there for a little while. because when it comes down to it, Penn State has a lot of young offensive linemen, and ideally, again, we won't see these guys in the fall or see them a whole heck of a lot, but Thorpe is somebody who I think can really challenge for time and push some of these guys along the interior of this line. And by the sounds of it, by the looks of it, that's what he's been doing this spring. I mean, I think the fact that James Franklin planned on talking to the team last week about not trying to rein in CJ Thorpe and his aggressiveness, I think that tells you just kind of what kind of spring this guy's had, and the fact that he's very, very much going to be out there, going to do a lot of trash talking, going to get after the defensive linemen, harass them, drive them crazy, all those types of things. So I'm curious to see how that translates again in a scrimmage format. We'll see, but if he's physically imposing his will, it's going to kind of be difficult to ignore that. So I would keep an eye on both of those guys. And real quick, two more guys. Spring darling KJ Hamler. This is the guy who I think, and again, I'll project spring awards here for a second if you bear with me. I would think Hamler, based off everything we've seen and heard, would be a guy who could take home one of Penn State's spring awards that they usually announce at halftime. And those awards, I think, are always very indicative of what the staff is thinking in terms of players who really have looked good behind the scenes and who have done some nice things through these 15 workouts. And by all accounts, based off of players we've talked to this spring, whether it's been practice or conference calls, whatnot, KJ Hamler is consistently that name that's been brought up as the guy in the slot who's given people trouble. So I want to see his speed kind of on full display, or as much full display as we'll see in April, and see if Hamler's really out there flying around. That could be a lot of fun to watch. So he's one. And while I'm on the topic of speed and speed kills, I will mention redshirt freshman running back Journey Brown as another guy. This running back position is pretty loaded, and I had a chance to talk with Audrey Snyder this week, sat down in his office for a story that I'm working on. And, not to tease this story too much, because it'll be pretty kind of all-encompassing, but one of the things that he did say is, they will have an alpha dog, the quote he used, an alpha dog in that backfield. But all these other guys, your Mark Allens, your Journey Browns, Ricky Slade gets here this summer. Sider didn't want to really, peg Slade for something yet, just because he doesn't have the familiarity with the guy, for one, given the fact of when he got hired at Penn State and those sorts of things. And two, you never know how quickly a guy is going to assimilate to college football, to pick up the offense, all those kinds of things. So let's see what Journey Brown does. I mean, I know from talking to people last year, they were really impressed with the work he did on the scout team and this blistering speed. Again, maybe this guy gets a chance to break one or two runs on Saturday. We'll see. But for now, those would be my 5 picks on offense. When we come back here on the Penn State Show on DK Sports Radio, I will run down the defense and also what's ahead, of course, beyond spring ball, because this thing, as we all know, never stops here on the Penn State Show on DK Sports Radio.
Miller Lite is the original light beer, and we'll always brew it to have more taste, with only 96 calories and 3.2 carbs. Because we believe that if you compromise on taste, you can taste the compromise. Miller Lite. Hold true.
Great beer, great responsibility. 2018 Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Average analysis, 12 fluid ounces. Less than 1 gram protein, 0 grams fat.
If you're one of the thousands of Western Pennsylvanians who love to get outdoors, then you need to check out this cool new website, stepoutside.org. Learn where, when, and how you can go camping, hiking, or hunting, or take part in power sports, shooting sports, or water sports in your local community or across the country at stepoutside.org, where everything you need to know is just a click away. That's stepoutside.org.
What I want from my public accounting firm is big ideas.
But I don't want to lose the personal attention.
My company needs global capabilities.
From a firm with local ownership.
And I want to work with industry experts.
Who take the time to understand my unique challenges. And that's what sets Schneider Downs apart. Expertise for the most complex business issues. With the service you need every day. To learn how our big thinking with a personal focus can help your company, Visit SchneiderDowns.com.
Injured in an accident? Need assistance in preserving your business's interests? Let the attorneys at Bassey, Vreeland & Associates protect your legal rights. For over 65 years, Bassey, Vreeland & Associates has been representing the citizens and businesses of southwestern Pennsylvania. With offices strategically located in Washington and Charleroi, Bassey, Vreeland & Associates can deliver results for you throughout the Pittsburgh area. Visit www.bmvlaw.com or call 724-228-7000 to see how Bassey, Vreeland & Associates can meet your legal needs. Bassey, Vreeland & Associates. We fight, we care, we win.
Welcome back to the Penn State Show here on DK Sports Radio, the blue-white edition of the Penn State Show. And the first part of the show, I mentioned my picks for offense on Saturday, guys, that I think we all should be keeping an eye on, people that I know for sure I'll be kind of circling in on, breaking out the binoculars to try and get a better view of from up in the press box. But when it comes to the defense, really beyond the linebackers and the defensive tackles, I really don't think there are that many other guys that will really garner that much interest, just from me, mainly because to me, you have two gaping holes, both at linebacker in a couple different spots, mainly because they're moving a lot of guys around. But also the depth at defensive tackle. Those are the two big spots. I mean, you know what Penn State has in terms of cornerbacks. You look at their defensive end. I had a chance to talk with Sharif Miller this week, and he said, and James Franklin even said this earlier this spring, that they think these defensive ends will be a strength this year, and they're really going to need these ends to be that strong point, especially until the defensive tackles and the linebackers kind of get this whole thing sorted out and get their footing. So, you know, you want to watch some of these younger defensive ends, of course, guys that they brought in that we don't get to see a whole heck of a lot. But to me, I just don't know how you cannot watch these linebackers right now. Micah Parsons naturally is the guy who all of us will be zeroing in on Saturday. And Franklin said this week that Parsons' dad is running a bus from Harrisburg, so he'll have a lot of fan support here. Micah Parsons has been operating at the will when I was over at practice Monday night. Again, short viewing window, about 10 minutes, but it was Cam Brown in the middle Monday night, and it was Micah Parsons at the will with the starters. And then the Sam was a combination of Koa Farmer and Jarvis Miller. So Jarvis Miller, I know I wrote about him last year, thinking that maybe last spring he was kind of turning the corner in that Sam, that hybrid linebacker role, but potentially this is maybe actually that year. Maybe I was just a little bit ahead of the curve there. But definitely Parsons you got to keep an eye on. Ellis Brooks, I mean, this is another guy. You look at the middle linebacking spot and what they do with Cam Brown. And a lot of people have asked kind of what's the depth look like at all those spots. And the thing and the reason, one of the reasons why Penn State at least hasn't given us a depth chart this spring is because they really couldn't come up with one at linebacker just because there's so many moving parts. And I say that because if Cam Brown is your middle linebacker, then of course he's not going to be at the will, which means he's also not going to be at the Sam, which he's played the Sam and the Mike this spring some. He said he's primarily been at the Mike, though, when I had a chance to talk with him this week. So then what that means is you got Micah Parsons, who moved over from the Mike to the will. So I think, you know, at least the way things look now. But again, this is totally speculative here, way too early to kind of rule anything out. But Micah Parsons very much a candidate for that starting spot at the will. And then the Sam is going to have to work itself out. They need Cole Farmer to step up. And if he doesn't step up, then do you move Cam Brown? Is Jarvis Miller ready for a bigger role? Do you have somebody who you can plug in the middle? Which to me, that's kind of, without the middle working, none of these other things are going to. And I asked Franklin on Monday, you know, what characteristics, what identifying characteristics are you looking for from this middle linebacker as you carry this competition out into the summer? And he said that he doesn't even expect that they will name a starter until well into camp, toward the end of camp, that it's just going to take them that much time. And he said, you know, it's somebody who not only physically, you know, has the size, the strength, the durability to hold up in the middle, but they've got to be comfortable calling the defense and being vocal and taking on that leadership role that comes with being in the middle. So that's why, you know, I think if we'd be foolish really to be looking anywhere else besides all three linebacking spots and then these defensive tackles. Some of the tackles I want to watch in particular include Fred Hansard, of course, Antonio Shelton, which we've seen more of Shelton than these other guys and the redshirt freshmen. A guy like Damian Barber put on a lot of weight since he's been here within the last 9 or so months. Physically, just looking at him this spring, looks like a guy who you say, wow, this looks like a big-time football player. But, again, that's only the eye test, really doesn't hold up for much, probably not anything at this point. So I'm curious to get a look at those guys and kind of see what if there's any type of rotation. But, again, keep in mind it's 1s versus 2s and 3s, so you have to take it all with a grain of salt. So really, to me, those are kind of these spots to keep an eye on defense. But I'll throw a couple other names out there just for the heck of it. Garrett Taylor, and I'll also tease another story. Taylor's story should be running today. By the time you hear this podcast, should be up over on the site. And I sat down with him this week to kind of go over his path to safety and just his journey back from a pretty major ACL tear that he had his senior year of high school, and really how that kind of put him behind the 8 ball. But this has been a really strong spring for Garrett Taylor. And so, you look at him back there alongside Nick Scott, and Taylor told me that the communication between those two has been really great this spring, that they're jiving pretty well, they're coming along. But Taylor said the biggest difference for him is just his comfort and his confidence. And that's the thing I kind of highlighted in the story, is that you look at this guy, gets here, he's behind, has the ACL injury. Then he finally takes about a year to get his legs back under him, to get comfortable with the defense. And then after that happens, then they present him with this position switch to safety. And so if you guys remember, and I'm sure many of you do, in that 2015 recruiting class, it was Taylor and John Reed were kind of the front runners. Obviously, Saquon Barkley was in there as well, but those were like your 3 most highly touted guys in that class. And this season potentially looks like it's going to be, at least for the time being, we're finally going to see Garrett Taylor and John Reed out there in the secondary together at the same time, taking on presumably starting roles. I mean, that's what Taylor's in line to start opposite Nick Scott. Obviously, John Reed's back healthy after his ACL injury, so really enjoyed getting a chance to sit down and talk with Taylor and outline, his recovery and just that path back, because it's certainly been a long one. But you look now, the benefit for this defense is this is a guy who has played a lot of special teams and certainly has the familiarity with the defense because he's been there, because he's been around it. And James Franklin mentioned this spring that, they like that veteran presence of Taylor, the fact that they've had guys in that same spot before, like Malik Golden, like Troy Apke last year. So I think you have to kind of see just how he looks out there. Again, for what it's worth, going against the 2s and 3s, probably not much. But getting him out there, getting some work this spring, we'll see who comes away with takeaways. The defensive backs, by everything I've heard, have been creating quite a few takeaways this spring, which, again, good news for the defense, potentially some bad news for the offense. We'll have to see, but if you're coming to the Blue-White game on Saturday, I hope you enjoy it. LeVar Arrington and his A11 All-Star game full of 8th grade standouts from all across the country. They'll be taking the field at 10 a.m. in Beaver Stadium, so I'm looking forward to catching up with LeVar this week. We'll see how that goes, potentially turning that into a story. And next week, I will be heading to Dallas to check out the NFL Draft, so I will be out there for Barkley Mania and have some coverage out there while I work on some other things. I'll be out there with a couple Penn State students who will be broadcasting live from out there in Jerry World. So I'm looking forward to checking out AT&T Stadium and just seeing how everything goes down out there. Should be pretty fun to check it all out. So plenty of draft talk coming up next week. But hope you enjoy the Blue-White game, and I will have plenty of coverage the rest of this week and, of course, up and through Saturday over on DKPittsburghSports.com.